by Dr. Jeffrey Schberg, in memoriam Dr. Macio Franklin Daly, and Dean of the College of Public Arts, Dr. Patricia
this equipment to see if it works. If you can see me and not just hear me, you can see TD Jakes in the back. I'll watch that in the morning to get my head right, get my spirit right. Because these devils, they be after you. So I'm opening my phone right now to start off with a preface to this podcast, and so each morning I listen to my writings because I'm working on a book.
Frontier in American History 1900 to 1930. Timothy Eugene Nelson. Preface. Blackdom was a real place. I have to make this fact clear, because my brother Maison Nelson thought I made it up. No lie. Maison, pronounced Maison, recorded my doctoral graduation. He flew all the way from the Air Force Base, where he was stationed in Las Vegas, Nevada, to El Paso, Texas. He took pictures with me holding my University of Texas at El Paso mock diploma. Still, after not seeing him for about 5 years, his question was, when you gone make some money? I graduated with a PhD in Borderland History on December 10th, 2015. With subfield expertise in African diasporic studies.
To El Paso, to northern New Mexico, you're going to see that we all intersect in a beautiful way. And so this is a timely story, it's relevant, and if you all could welcome Dr. Nelson, and I'd like to thank CCA for supporting this. Welcome, Dr. Nelson.
Okay, so Marisa is like everything else. Like, you all wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her. I would just be the homeless dude that they kicked out of Dunkin' Donuts. If you're not familiar with Dunkin' Donuts, you'll read about it later. Okay, so today we're going to do a few things. Because we have this particular audience, we're going to do two things. We're going to use the Blackdom narrative so that we all can intersect at that point. And so that's what you're going to have now. However, we all come from different places to this intersection, so let's watch this first. Okay. So, that can get pretty awkward, right? Saying the wrong stuff in a room full of people, particularly today, right? If you say something wrong, oh my, you are a... It's not what we're doing here today, okay? What we're doing here is providing a safe space, even when we say things and do things like what you just saw. We're gonna have a little bit of intersectionality training because of this particular audience. So this is what we'll cover. Please pull out your phones. We're going to have a few minutes for this. Please pull out your phones. Turn it on silent, but I want it on. Please raise your hand if you have unlimited service. Raise your hand if you have unlimited service. Okay, everyone raise your hand and then stand up, please. If you can. If you don't. Okay, so if you have unlimited service tonight, you're going to lend that privilege to everyone else who doesn't, because you're going to be a part of the experience. Okay, you may have a seat. You all see them? Okay, good. So this is what we're going to cover. Please turn your reader off. Race in Blackdom. It's called Blackdom. We're going to get to that in a minute. The Afro Frontier. To get my PhD, I had to write a dissertation, and it was on Blackdom. Within my dissertation was the theory of Afro-frontierism. That's what I'll be talking about at the Western History Conference. The Alpha Frontier, raise your hand if you're familiar with Frederick Jackson Turner's thesis, the Frontier thesis. This is a new thesis. This is a frontier thesis from the perspective of black folks. Black, and I'm going to say non-Hispanic for a particular reason. You'll find out later, okay? And lastly, we're going to get to the point where we can at least begin a conversation here. Race doesn't exist. Now, that's the beginning of the conversation, not the end, okay? It's the beginning, because while race doesn't exist, racism does. Your voice. Okay, this is my voice. I broke it down into the pieces where you can find me. So, instead of yelling at me here today, you can yell at me for the rest of your life on Twitter, Facebook, all of that other stuff. But today we're going to play along because the intersection is what we need to teach people how to get to. Okay? Now, I teach classes, and very few times, okay, never, has there ever been a historian to have an intro, right? Like a real intro, like, you know, if Jay-Z was coming out, he wouldn't just come out, he'd, you know, flames and everything. So, okay, so this is my version.
Oh, you think you're better than me?
I have the honor to
You think
present
you're better
two
than me?
candidates for the degree Doctor of Philosophy. The candidates for the degree of
Good evening. Tonight, we go after the story of an extraordinary personality. He is Salvador Dali, the great surrealist painter, who sees the world through surrealist eyes. If you're curious to hear Salvador Dali talk about decadence, death, and immortality, about his surrealist art, his
Proclamation, also known as the Morals
we'll go after those stories in just a moment. My name is Mike Walker.
Take all the water with it and not leave any behind.
Flippers come in.
Black nationalism, which means that the black man should control the politics of his own community and control the politicians who are in his own community.
We must also realize that the problems of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved
We'll talk with Salvador
without
Dali in
a
just a
radical redistribution of political and economic power.
There's this myth that black people did not resist until Watts or until Malcolm or until the Black Panther Party. It's just not true. The first thing that the Black Panther Party did, of course, in Oakland was to patrol the community, to set up an armed patrol in order to ensure that black people were not harassed and intimidated by the local police department. But that had been done in the South. It was done in Birmingham. My father participated in armed patrols because they had to protect the community. They get out there. I want you to see that, particularly for the end, because the end, my little daughter, she's watching right now. So I just wanted her to see herself. But she's my why. Her mother is from Iowa, and for this purpose, because we haven't gotten that far in our lecture yet, her mother is white, and I am black. And so, in teaching about this intersection, I'm teaching my daughter the whole time. I'm helping her to understand this new world that she has to exist into. So this lesson is built with her in mind. You just get to participate. All right, so I get 10 volunteers if you know your ABCs. Raise your hand if you know your ABCs. Please stand if you know your ABCs. Please stand if you know your ABCs. All right.
Okay. Let me see. I can't see you in the back, so go ahead and sit down. The further back you are, go ahead and sit down because I can't see you. No, you stay. No, you don't try to get on. All right, so I'm going to point to you, and you're going to give me the letter in the order because we know the ABCs, right? You ready? You ready?
Ready. Maybe. A.
B.
C. T. E.
F.
G. H. I.
J.
K. L. M.
N.
O. P. Q. R.
S. T.
U. V. W.
X.
Y. Z.
Backwards.
Z. W.
Yeah, you need to group. Go ahead, sit down. Go ahead, sit down. Go ahead, sit down. See, the other ones in here have either been through this experience or they knew, oh, he's setting us up. However, they were sitting there going, well, I know my ABCs too. We say we know things that we really don't. Because if you knew them, you could do it backwards. If I said, do you know your numbers 1 to 10? You could probably do this. Because you know them. So, I'm going to give you the narrative that is out there for Blackdom. Now, it bores me to tears. I apologize, but it does. However, when I get really bored, I'm going to cut it off. It won't go any longer than 10 minutes. I suggest that you take out your phones. This is the time where you can use those phones. And it's okay to go to, you ready? You got the Google out? Take out the Google. You know all of those with unlimited access. If you can, go to blackpass.org and you're going to search for Blackdom, New Mexico. I'm going to say it again. Blackpast.org. Past, P-A-S-T.org. Now, this is a site where you can get a lot of black history from. So you want to know it because we're going to come back to it later. So if you can't get it now, it's okay. It's the narrative that I wrote about Blackdom. I tried to change it on Wikipedia and they wouldn't let me. So I got beef with Wikipedia, so that's why I'm sending you to blackpass.org. Okay, some of y'all got it? Okay. Now, I'm gonna let this narrative roll, but as soon as I get bored, I'm gonna go ahead
and so, what is Blackdom?
Blackdom is first an idea. It was a place, but the idea was more important, and the idea lasted longer. For example, after the 29 crash, Blackdom still existed. They were still leasing land to oil companies, and they received, and some of the Blackdomites received oil royalties well into the World War II era. Well, when you look at Wikipedia, for example, and I'm going to mention why I said Wikipedia. When you look at Wikipedia, it says that Blackdom ended in 21, basically in the middle of that era. But they skip a whole 10-year period that Blackdom existed from, when they say it ended in 1921. I don't know when you read, but 1921-ish, it's wrong. Well, why do I mention Wikipedia? Because I tried to change Wikipedia, and they wouldn't allow me to change it. Yeah, they whatever reason.
So, what is Blackdom? Is it so if I don't know about it?
Okay, what is Blackdom? Blackdom was an investment vehicle. Black towns were profit makers for black people. It's like getting a record label. You had over 200 different towns and enclaves that were trying to incorporate, because you can take money from the outside world and you can circulate it within a town. Well, that was the idea behind Blackdom. Most of the people that started Blackdom were already living in New Mexico where there were no Jim Crow laws. So when they built the refuge was for everyone else coming in. They didn't have the same sensibilities. So Blackdom was an investment vehicle that marketed blackness so that other black people can come and build a refuge and go on from there. But their main idea was to build educational institutions, so on and so on. They actually had a seminary as well.
How many people were there?
It's hard to know specifically because the census during that time period is a little shady. The census would tell you about 400. Boyer would say it was closer to 1,000, more like 800 to 1,000. But by the time it got big, they started spreading out because during the 1920s, you had a lot of violence against black people. Well, as black people started getting successful, I mean, because Blackdom, they struck oil around 1919, 1920, they organized the Blackdom Oil Company. But in 1920s, you also have like the burning of Black Wall Street, right? So the violence against black excellence was always there. So they created a system that could be excellent, but not be something that someone can easily burn down. So for example, they sold their church in 1921. So people say, oh, the town didn't exist because they sold the church. Well, they sold the church because you can't burn down a church if it's not there. So they kind of filtered into to the surrounding areas. But Blackdom existed as a way for them to exchange capital and build wealth.
Kind of talk about how blacks wanted to go there, and what it meant to a black person during that time to be in Blackdom.
The complexity, think about having 4 or 5 generations in the South functioning on rain. Just imagine rain in the South versus rain in southeastern New Mexico. There was no such thing. There were droughts and all these other things. So you're talking about people who knew how to farm but had no water, or had to figure out a whole new watering system, whole new crops. So they had to be industrious. They had to learn new things, go to new places. These were not just regular people. They were extraordinary. Most of whom were college educated, Freemasons, educated through the military. This is an extraordinary group.
And so why did they want to come here?
They could see opportunity in the distance between the racism of New Mexicans and no Jim Crow laws. They understood that race didn't exist. They just needed the space to organize their opportunity just for them. So that's how Blackdom fit into the New Mexico overall history. They understood that it was federal territory, which meant that they couldn't have Jim Crow laws for the most part. But they were going to southeastern New Mexico, which was established by Confederates, ex-Confederates. So.
And what was talking about Confederates, what was the tone of the rest of New Mexico during that time? Talk about the racism and how it was dangerous for blacks. And
this is the part that well, New Mexico was not a place that allowed the Ku Klux Klan to fully mature. However, the first established Klan chapter was in Chavez County, the same place as Blackdom, in about 1924. So you have that tension, but you also have, for example, during World War II, you can read articles of women from Blackdom sewing together scrubs to send off to World War II veterans. They would do it in the window, but they would do it in the window next to the colonel's wife, who's also organized a group, and they come together and they do things patriotically. So there were both tensions. There was, oh, we're going to come together for this, but then there were also fights against the kids in school, throwing rocks and all this other kind of stuff that was racialized. So while it wasn't the South, it was still racial tensions that grew, and the more black success grew, the more the tensions grew. They didn't have the loitering laws that you would have in the South until the 1920s. Well, why is that? Because Blackdom struck oil, and now you have all these black people walking around who succeeded where, you know, other people did.
And you say that these blacks still they lived in Blackdom, but they also lived in other surrounding cities.
Oh yeah. The regular pace of things was okay, so someone comes in from another place, their family stays with a family that's already established. What they're doing is getting government land because homesteading, and as long as you prove up the land over in this case it was 3 years, it's desert land, so after that 3 years you get your land and then your family moves to your land. So basically that's the basic system. What was your question? Sorry, I was going to keep going on a long rant.
You were telling me earlier that blacks lived in Blackdom,
right?
But then they also lived in other surrounding cities like Roswell.
Right. So let's say your homestead, because it's desert and there's droughts, it didn't work. So now you, as the person who is doing all of this stuff on the land, now you go to Roswell or Dexter or Artesia, or you're a porter on one of the, you know, trains, Santa Fe Railroad, and you take that money and you bring it back to Blackdom. So while everyone was not fully engaging Blackdom on a daily basis, there was a time when they did. And you could also do things under the name of Blackdom while in Roswell or in another city.
What does that mean?
Okay. Pie chart of black professors at New Mexico State doesn't even have a number because it's just a sliver. So if you want to understand why the history hasn't been told, it's because you don't have any black people telling the story. They tell the story like this. And remember, this story that you see from them comes from a particular perspective. It was to talk about how New Mexico was receiving of everyone. It's a revisiting of history that wasn't. That's what that sounds like. Boyer had problems in the South, came to New Mexico, and he was good. He found the promised land. What he's saying there, he was Moses. That's good for the family narrative, but how can I benefit from that? I'm not Moses. So, I had a committee for my dissertation, and one of the professors, Dr. Shepard, he said, hey, why don't you do this thing on Blackdom? I watched that and I was like, that is not the kind of history I want to do. He's like, no, just do it. So it took me 2 years to get into it. I got into it when I said, okay, I will do Blackdom if I can find somebody that reminds me of Compton. I'm originally from Compton, and if I can find somebody in Blackdom that I could see in Compton, I will go ahead and write this dissertation about Blackdom. You'll meet her later. Okay, so that's the pie chart. Look, look, no number. The pie chart says it all. Okay, so what I need you to do is to look under your seat. You get a car. No, I'm kidding. There's a census underneath your chair with a pin. Well, if you had to put your chair on the ground, it's probably not there. There may be some over there. Now, there should be 2 sheets of paper. Okay, one double-sided. This right here, though, if you get one, this is on the table. We are going to get into race stuff. So this is also your white privilege. To be able to say what you need to say, raise your hand, and then we have to address you. Okay, so when I talk about race doesn't exist, I'm trying to get us all to a place where we all can talk. Malcolm had this saying, you know, if we could all come to the table and not offend each other, we could just get out on the table what we really have to say, a lot of this stuff wouldn't be a problem. The table that we're trying to set today is, we're going to begin the conversation at race doesn't exist. Good? All right, so now while this video of Tim Wise is playing, I want you to take the census. It is on the front with, you should see it says hashtag census us. And oh, by the way, that hashtag you can use when you're on social media. When you're on social media to talk about this particular thing, if you're one of those kind of people.
Yes, we can establish a whole township is possible, people. We can name the town, we can name the streets, we can have our own schools, we can have our own post office. We have these skills. That's the knapsack of experiences that we brought from a period of slavery. Let's do it. That was the leadership. Yes, we can establish.
Begun in the early 1900s, this pioneer town was different than most built in the West. It was heralded as the first exclusive Negro settlement in the Mexican territory. It was a place where blacks could truly be free, a planned colony where they could determine their own destiny, not be attacked